What if I told you that most of the problems that break hearts, destroy relationships, and steal our peace are not actually complicated? What if the real tragedy of life is not that problems are hard, but that the solutions are often so simple that we refuse to see them? Life has a strange way of making simple things feel incredibly complicated. Sometimes we believe that our problems are too big, too painful, or too confusing to solve. But the truth is, many of life's biggest struggles have the simplest answers. And often, love is where those answers quietly wait to be discovered. I remember a story about two people who loved each other deeply. At the beginning, everything felt easy. Conversations flowed naturally, laughter filled the air, and even silence felt comfortable. But as time passed, small misunderstandings began to appear. Messages were misinterpreted. Words were left unsaid. Slowly, the relationship that once felt effortless started feeling heavy. Both of them believed the problem was complicated. One thought the other had changed. The other believed love was fading. Nights were spent overthinking, wondering what had gone wrong. The distance between them grew, not because love disappeared, but because simple truths were ignored. One evening, after weeks of quiet tension, they finally sat down together. No arguments, no accusations, just honesty. And something surprising happened. They realized the problem wasn't complicated at all. He admitted he had been stressed and afraid of showing weakness. She confessed she had been feeling ignored but didn't know how to say it. The silence that had built walls between them was suddenly replaced with understanding. The solution had been simple all along. They just needed to talk. Life works this way more often than we realize. Many of our struggles grow bigger because we stop communicating, stop listening, or let fear convince us that things are harder than they really are. Instead of choosing simple honesty, we choose pride. Instead of asking questions, we assume the worst. But love teaches us something powerful: simplicity is strength. Sometimes the solution to a broken connection is a conversation. Sometimes the cure for loneliness is simply reaching out. Sometimes the answer to confusion is asking one honest question. Yet our minds often complicate what our hearts already understand. The truth is, life doesn't always demand complex strategies or dramatic changes. Often it only asks for small acts of courage, an apology, a conversation, a moment of patience, or the willingness to see someone else's perspective. When we look at life through the lens of love, problems begin to lose their power. Not because difficulties disappear, but because love reminds us that solutions don't always need to be complicated. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is choose the simplest path: understanding instead of assumption, honesty instead of silence, and love instead of fear. In many love stories, the beginning always feels effortless. Two people talk for hours without running out of words. Every story feels interesting, every thought feels important, and every emotion feels heard. Listening comes naturally because the heart is open and curiosity is alive. But as time passes, something slowly begins to change. Life becomes busy, responsibilities grow, and the simple act of listening quietly starts to fade. This is often where problems begin to grow. Imagine a couple who once shared everything with each other. At the start, when one spoke, the other truly listened, not just to respond, but to understand. The tone of the voice, the pauses between words, the emotions hidden behind a smile. Listening was not just about hearing sentences, it was about feeling the person behind them. But over time, they began to listen less and assume more. One evening she tried to tell him about a difficult day she had. She wasn't asking for a solution. She wasn't asking for advice. She only wanted someone to hear her feelings. But instead of listening fully, he interrupted with quick answers, thinking he was helping. In his mind, he was solving the problem, but in her heart, she felt unseen. Days later, he tried to share something that was troubling him. Stress had been building quietly inside him. When he spoke, he hoped she would notice the weight behind his words. But she was distracted, thinking about her own worries, responding with brief replies that never truly reached the depth of what he was trying to express. Neither of them intended to hurt the other. Yet something small had begun to grow between them. A simple lack of listening slowly turned into misunderstanding. Misunderstanding slowly turned into frustration. And frustration slowly turned into emotional distance. This is how many problems in life become bigger than they really are. When people stop listening, they start filling the silence with assumptions. And assumptions rarely carry the truth. They are shaped by fear, insecurity, and past experiences rather than real understanding. Listening is one of the simplest acts of love, yet it is often the first thing people forget when life becomes complicated. True listening requires patience. It requires putting aside the desire to win an argument, to prove a point, or to quickly fix everything. It asks a person to slow down and truly see the emotions behind someone's words. Sometimes the most powerful thing one person can give another is not advice, not solutions, but attention. The quiet assurance that their voice matters, their feelings are real, and their presence is valued. In many moments of life, people search for complicated answers to problems that are quietly asking for something simple. The mind begins to analyze every detail, creating endless possibilities and fears, while the heart waits patiently with a much easier solution. Love has a quiet way of revealing that many struggles do not need complex strategies, only sincere care and understanding. There was once a couple who had begun drifting apart without even realizing it. In the beginning of their relationship, everything felt natural. They celebrated small moments together, shared laughter without effort, and found comfort in each other's presence. But as time moved forward, responsibilities grew heavier. Work became demanding, daily routines became exhausting, and the warmth they once shared slowly began to fade behind stress and silence. One evening she sat alone, thinking about how different everything had become. She wondered if love had simply disappeared, or if something deeper had been lost along the way. Her thoughts became complicated, filled with doubts and questions she didn't know how to answer. She believed the relationship needed some grand solution, some dramatic change to bring back what they once had. At the same time, he was sitting in another room, feeling almost the same confusion. He felt the distance too, but he didn't know how to explain it. The silence between them felt heavy, as if a wall had slowly formed where warmth once lived. Days passed like this, both of them believing the problem was difficult to solve. Then one quiet night, something very simple happened. He walked into the room where she was sitting and gently asked if she was okay. Not in a rushed or distracted way, but with genuine attention. For the first time in weeks, she felt that someone truly wanted to hear her thoughts. She began speaking honestly about how lonely she had been feeling, how much she missed the connection they once shared. Instead of defending himself or offering quick explanations, he simply listened. The tension that had been building slowly softened. There was no complicated plan, no dramatic gesture, just two people allowing love to guide their honesty. They realized that what they truly needed was not something complex, but something they had quietly stopped giving each other: time, patience, and sincere attention. Love has a unique way of simplifying the chaos people create in their minds. When two hearts choose kindness instead of pride, and openness instead of distance, problems that once looked overwhelming begin to feel smaller and clearer. Sometimes the solution has always been present, hidden in a simple moment of care, waiting for someone to choose love over hesitation. Fear has a quiet but powerful way of turning simple situations into complicated ones. It doesn't always appear loudly or dramatically. Often, it hides behind hesitation, silence, or overthinking. In relationships and in life, fear can take something that requires a small act of honesty and transform it into something that feels impossible to face. In the beginning of a love story, people are usually fearless. They speak freely, express their feelings openly, and take emotional risks without thinking too much about the outcome. A person can say, "I miss you," or "I need you," without worrying about how it will be received. The heart feels brave because it is guided by hope rather than doubt. But as time goes on, experiences begin to shape the way people react. A misunderstanding here, a disagreement there, a moment where someone feels hurt or rejected. These small moments slowly plant seeds of fear in the mind. Suddenly, simple expressions of love begin to feel risky. There was once a man who deeply cared about someone but struggled to express what he felt. Whenever he thought about telling her how important she was to him, his mind filled with doubts. What if she didn't feel the same way anymore? What if his words sounded weak? What if opening his heart made him vulnerable to rejection? Because of these fears, he chose silence. At the same time, the woman he cared about was facing her own fears. She felt the distance growing but didn't know how to address it. Part of her wanted to ask if something had changed, but another part of her worried that asking the question might push him further away. So she also stayed quiet. What could have been solved with one honest conversation slowly became a confusing emotional distance. Both of them were protecting themselves from imagined pain, yet the silence they created caused the very distance they were afraid of. Fear often creates complicated stories inside the mind. It convinces people that speaking honestly will lead to disaster, that vulnerability will lead to loss, and that taking emotional risks will only bring disappointment. In reality, many situations only require a simple step forward, one honest question, one sincere confession, or one moment of courage. Yet fear paints these small steps as mountains that are too difficult to climb. Instead of choosing clarity, people begin analyzing every possibility. They replay conversations in their minds, search for hidden meanings in small actions, and create explanations that may not even exist. The situation becomes tangled not because the problem is complex, but because fear has wrapped it in layers of doubt and hesitation. A heart guided by fear often forgets how simple truth can be. In many relationships, the biggest problems are not created by a lack of love, but by a lack of understanding. Two people may care deeply for each other, yet still feel distant because they are seeing the same situation through completely different perspectives. When understanding disappears, even small issues can grow into painful misunderstandings. In the beginning of a relationship, people try very hard to understand one another. They ask questions, pay attention to emotions, and notice the small details that reveal what the other person is feeling. A simple change in tone, a quiet pause during a conversation, or a tired expression can immediately capture their attention. Understanding feels natural because both people are curious about each other's inner world. But as time passes, familiarity can sometimes replace curiosity. There was once a couple who had shared many beautiful moments together. They knew each other's favorite songs, favorite places, and even the little habits that made each other smile. Yet despite knowing these things, they slowly began misunderstanding each other more often. One evening, he came home after a long and exhausting day. Work had been overwhelming, and his mind was heavy with responsibilities. Instead of explaining how tired he felt, he became quiet and distant. His silence wasn't meant to hurt anyone, it was simply his way of processing the pressure he had been carrying all day. But when she noticed his silence, she interpreted it differently. To her, his quiet behavior felt cold and uncaring. She believed he was ignoring her or losing interest in the relationship. Her mind began filling with questions that had nothing to do with the reality of the situation. Because she felt hurt, her tone became slightly defensive when she spoke to him. When he sensed this tension, he became even more withdrawn, believing he was being blamed for something he didn't understand. A simple misunderstanding slowly started building emotional distance between them. Neither of them realized that the real issue was not a lack of love, but a lack of understanding. He needed patience and support after a difficult day. She needed reassurance and emotional presence. Both needs were simple, yet neither of them had clearly expressed what they were feeling. Understanding requires more than hearing words. It requires the willingness to see life from another person's perspective. It means asking questions before forming conclusions, and recognizing that people often carry emotions that are not immediately visible. When two people pause long enough to truly understand each other, many problems begin to look smaller and clearer. The tension created by assumption slowly disappears when empathy replaces judgment. Feelings that once seemed confusing begin to make sense when someone chooses to look beyond their own point of view. Life often feels heavy not because problems are impossible to solve, but because people choose complicated paths when simple ones are quietly waiting. The human mind has a habit of turning small emotional situations into long struggles filled with pride, assumptions, and endless overthinking. In relationships especially, peace is rarely found through complexity. It is found through simple choices that require honesty, patience, and love. There was once a moment in a relationship where two people stood on opposite sides of a growing silence. Neither of them had stopped loving the other, yet both felt tired from the tension that had slowly built between them. Small disagreements had turned into long periods of distance. Messages became shorter, conversations became careful, and laughter became rare. Both of them believed the situation had become too complicated to fix. He thought that too many mistakes had been made. She believed that too many emotions had been hurt. Each of them carried their own version of the story, and those stories slowly created invisible walls between their hearts. Days passed with quiet frustration. Instead of addressing the real issue, both of them kept replaying past moments in their minds. They searched for explanations, tried to understand every detail, and wondered whether the relationship could return to the way it once felt. But sometimes peace does not come from solving every detail of the past. Sometimes peace arrives when someone chooses a simple step forward. One evening, after thinking about everything for far too long, she decided to send a message that contained only a few honest words. There was no long explanation, no emotional argument, no complicated discussion about who was right or wrong. She simply told him that she missed the connection they once shared and hoped they could talk openly again. The message was simple, but it carried sincerity. When he read those words, something inside him softened. All the complicated thoughts he had been carrying suddenly felt unnecessary. Instead of continuing the cycle of silence and pride, he responded with the same honesty. He admitted that he had also been missing the closeness they once had but didn't know how to rebuild it. In that moment, both of them realized that peace had never required complicated solutions. It only required someone to take the first simple step toward understanding. Choosing the simple path often means letting go of the need to win arguments, letting go of pride, and letting go of the belief that every emotional situation must be perfectly explained before healing can begin. It means choosing kindness when frustration appears and choosing honesty when silence feels easier.